The US debt dilemma. What is going on? The US is piling on debt like nobody's business. We're talking about $37 trillion of debt and over possible revenues of about 28 to 29 trillion. You are looking at the debt to GDP ratio of 125-130%. I'm going to give you the exact numbers. I'm just giving you a broad overview here. What is going on with the United States? Is the US going bankrupt? And if it is, how does one avoid it? All this and more in this very important slide presentation for you all, and I would really appreciate it if you can like this video and if you can follow us on Twitter or on social media, wherever you are. That way you can get information as soon as it breaks out on PGurus, whether it is the .com or on the YouTube channels. Thank you very much in advance. Here we go. The US debt dilemma. Why is the US running up its debt so much? What is the way out? Has this been as bad as what it is today in the past? If so, what was the reason? All this and more, we are very deeply indebted to the Council of Foreign Relations, which put together this white paper. Much of our research is centered around that findings. This is the official government report. There are no fudging of numbers or anything of that nature. Very highly reputed report. I would urge all of you to read through all the links that we have provided in the description section so that you get a good handle on what is happening in the world's most powerful country. What happens to US today might happen to other countries tomorrow. So this is something that is like a sober reminder of the times we live in. The US national debt has soared to historic levels. This figure includes both the debt held by the public, such as the treasury securities held by private investors, foreign governments and the Federal Reserve, and intragovernmental holdings such as the debt owed due to Social Security trust funds. Many economists say that a rapidly mounting debt load could soon diminish US economic growth, restrict government spending on important programs, and raise the likelihood of financial crises. Everything centers around what happens when the US spends more than it earns. Right? So because it's a sovereign debt, it can print any amount of money, but there has to be a reason for doing that. Will the world accept it if the US continues to print the dollar? Actually, it's not physically printing the dollar these days. It is just electronically transferring from one entity to another, and voila, the entity that received the transfer gets the money, and then electronically it gets disbursed. And this is something, this is the crux of the CBDC argument also. Central bank digital currency, should that be the way out? All this is something that you'll start to thinking once you understand the problem that US finds itself in here. Now, what happens is every time talks come about budget trimming, nobody wants to give up their spending. Whether it is in their constituency or on their pet project, they don't want to give up on that. Yet they don't look at the other side, meaning like whatever they have put money into for their pet projects, what is it giving in terms of return? When they don't know, or if they can't really get the returns that they are expecting, then what happens is they tend to ignore that. This is how things have ballooned. People can say that, oh, because of COVID we were forced to do it, but COVID is long gone, 2 years over. Still, we are running up huge deficits. What is the reason? What was the reason for so many illegals to be accommodated and given $2,000 checks a month per person? I mean, average American doesn't make that kind of money in rural America. So this is just, I mean, beyond my comprehension at least, as to why US took in 15 million illegals and they are feeding them now, and they are trying to hide them too. Very sad what is going on. So let's not go there. Let's get back to this. The US national debt has grown substantially in both absolute terms and relative to the size of the economy. The debt to GDP ratio, which exceeded 120% in early 2020s, is now at levels only seen during major global conflicts such as the World War II. I'm going to show you a few graphs that will help you understand this thing better. I also urge you to watch this on a television screen because the graphs will look much better when you see it on a big screen. If you don't understand the trends, then you cannot fix the problem, or even you can't even try and fix the problem. So let's take a look at what is going on. Where did all this begin? Deficits measure yearly shortfalls, while debt measures the total amount owed over time, like cumulative. Expressing debt and deficit as a percentage of GDP allows for fair comparisons across eras. Post World War II is a starting point for examining modern debt trends. When was the last time the debt to GDP ratio rose over 100%? It was in 1946, after World War II ended, because the United States had to go find money to rehabilitate Germany. It also had to rehabilitate Japan, and then after the Korean War it had to do it for Korea. You get the idea. So I think as part of the rehabilitation of Japan, I think Taiwan also was rehabilitated. So US spent a lot of money. It was sitting at the top of the ivory tower in 1945 because it entered the war late and therefore didn't lose a lot of money. But by the time the war ended, the US was the leader of the free world. So you can see here in 1946 is when the debt to GDP ratio went really high, and then the inverse means high, negative number, right? The deficit. That means that much money. Another way to understand this is, let's say, is it minus 30%? That means you are earning $70 and spending $100. So that's how you get a minus 30. Again, I'm not an economist. I'm just trying to explain to you, simplify it, oversimplify it perhaps. Don't kill me. Some of you economic enthusiasts who know more about this, you understand what I'm saying. All I'm trying to say is, essentially, you're not earning as much as you're spending. So you print your money, print your way out of it. And that's what happened. But in the late 1940s and early 1950s, the US was relatively still unscathed from the World War, so they started enjoying surpluses because the world needed many goods, only US was producing them. However, with time you will see that the surpluses became less and the deficits start running up. And in 1980s, when under Reagan, the deficit started going high again, because Reagan said that we are going to spend a lot of money to ensure that the USSR, the Soviet Republic, gets bankrupted. So that part is well understood. Now if you look at it again, in the 1980s, towards the second half, the deficit started reducing. In fact, you had a few surplus years also, and that is explained here. In 1990s, tax hikes, defense cuts, and a booming economy helped reduce debt as a share of GDP. From 1998 to 2001, this is under Clinton and beginning of George Bush II, annual budget surpluses were recorded. In the 2000s, under George W. Bush, tax cuts, wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, and the addition of Medicare Part D led to growing deficits again. Every time you go to a war, the deficits will go up. Now, US is embroiled in two wars. Although you can say that it's not directly fighting in Israel, but you get the idea. It is actually giving a lot of aid to Israel. Now, then what happened? In the late 2000s, 2008 is when we had the global recession, and that's when we had to print, this was because of the real estate crisis. Obama continued bank bailouts and large stimulus spending, and that drove deficits to over $1 trillion every year. So you can see here, this is 2022, just a snapshot of 1 year to understand the revenue and spending as a percentage of GDP. Okay, now revenue is 18%, and the spending is a good 25%. So at least 7% more has been spent. So the federal deficit was actually 5.5%. So these numbers are not to scale. So it's 5.5% of the GDP. The net interest payments, that's the thing that is paid for the money that is owed by the government to various stakeholders. Now that needs to be small. If that starts becoming bigger and bigger, there is no hope, because you are still paying the interest. When are you going to pay the principal? That's the point. That's where things get really bad. So now let's take a look at where exactly is the government spending its money. There are some mandatory spending such as Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and etc. Discretionary spending and interest on the debt. I showed you the interest on the debt. Now, what are the mandatory spending programs? Social Security, Medicare, I just said. and discretionary spending is something that is approved annually by Congress. For example, funding for Ukraine, funding for many countries, Pakistan, all that stuff. In fiscal year 2022, discretionary spending was only 27% of the total, with about 750 billion going to defense. Other major discretion spending categories are education, veterans benefits, transportation. Each received around $150 billion. As of September 30, 2024, about 2 months ago, total US funding for the Ukraine response stands at nearly 183 billion. Some might make the argument, well, all of that is going to come back because Ukraine will buy arms produced by US. There are a lot of other countries that have also sold arms to Ukraine. So I don't think that is true. Of the 183 billion, 130 billion has been formally obligated and 86.7 billion has been disbursed. The Congress appropriated 174.2 billion through 5 Ukraine supplemental acts, with 163.6, a little bit less than that, allocated for OAR and Ukraine response specifically. An additional 18.2 billion, see, you add up the 163.6 with 18.2 and you get somewhere close to the 183 billion. An additional 18.2 billion came from regular agency appropriations and 1.1 billion from other supplemental acts. So let's take a look at 2022. Where does federal spending go? Net interest payments 8%, 475 billion. Discretionary spending, we talked about what are different categories. Non-defense is 751 billion, defense is 910 billion. Now I bet that the non-defense spending, a big chunk is taking care of all the illegals who came in. 8% is other and mandatory spending, about 520 billion. 8% is student loan programs. This is proposed. I don't think this has been enacted because Supreme Court struck it down. I'll have more information on that for you in just a moment. Income security programs, 581 billion, Medicare and Social Security. You get the idea. 19% of the federal spending is going towards Social Security. If you add Medicare, Medicaid and Social Security, that comes to 40%. 40% of the spending is going towards these three, and these are all directed towards individuals who have retired. So you can see, as US lives longer, this is also going to become a huge problem. And fewer full-time jobs are coming, which means less and less money is going into the Social Security program. What are the non-defense discretionary spending? Education, transportation, housing, veterans benefit and other programs. See how cleverly they don't take out and say this is the amount spent towards illegal immigrants. That's not there. It's talking about education, transportation. That transportation is a big deal. Housing, they were put up in like 5-star hotels like the Roosevelt, and the money that was owed to the Pakistan government for these illegal staying has been converted as part of the IMF package, I'm told. So it's just crazy the way this has been manipulated. Others include some veterans benefits, federal, civilian and military retirement benefits and other mandatory programs, minus income from offsetting receipts. It's a little technical. You need to read the actual document because that document is about 25-30 pages. I've tried to simplify this and I'm presenting it to you in its simplified form. The Biden administration recorded student loan forgiveness outlays as a cost in fiscal year 2022 because they wanted to write off some of the student-led loans, but this debt forgiveness program was later rejected by the Supreme Court. Because what happens is it's essentially like bankrupting that program. Whoever had given loans to the students, they would only get cents on the dollar, maybe 60 cents, maybe 70 cents. But how about the 30-cent for shortfall, right? That is the problem. That's why I think the Supreme Court rejected it. I don't know where that stands now. Mandatory programs like Social Security, Medicare drive long-term spending growth. I told you this is a big concern. Without revenue increases or policy changes, these programs will consume a larger share of GDP. I told you that, like already at 40%, Social Security, Medicare and Medicaid. Interest on the debt is projected to grow rapidly, rising from 2.5% of GDP in 2023 to nearly 7.5% over next 30 years. And I'm going to show you how this thing goes up. See here, these are all the primary drivers of debt growth. Mandatory spending, other is not much, but Social Security is sort of tapering off at 6%. Net interest keeps going up. major healthcare programs keep going up, discretionary spending also is tapering off. But by 2050, you are going to see huge amount of interest payments and major healthcare programs. This is again because America is living longer. Why is the tax revenue remaining low? Because in 2017, Trump gave corporate tax cuts. Before that, it was a ridiculous 35% for corporates in the US. So what US companies were doing was something called as tax inversion, meaning they would reincorporate their companies into Ireland, which was only 12% corporate tax. And the way they would do it is they would acquire a company based out of Ireland doing something similar and then incorporate themselves into that company and thereby not pay taxes in the US. And there used to be some clever gimmicks. People used to jump through the hoops. The Big Four helped a lot for all these companies and they used to fudge a lot of these things. Now, tax inversion had to be broken, which is why Trump brought it down from 35% to 22%. Effectively, 22% is like 17 or 18% for individual corporations, because you get some other you get some other breaks, and that kind of brings it down to 18%, which was okay. Ireland was 12%, so 12, 18, more or less we are in the ballpark. Now, I don't think Trump can raise that. Now you understand why he's talking about tariffs. The COVID-19 relief measures pushed the 2020 deficit to 3.1 trillion, around 15% of GDP, the highest since World War II. Now, under Biden, new initiatives like, for example, infrastructure bill, climate legislation, and student loan forgiveness have made the deficit become even worse. The US foreign assistance reached a 70-year high in 2022 because of its funding Ukraine. As of December 2024, as of this month, the deficit as a share of GDP was larger than any peacetime non-recessionary period, any time before. The US debt compares with other countries. If you look at it, there are only two countries that are worse than the United States, Japan and Italy. And today, the US continues to be the world's largest economy and has so far not defaulted on its debt. But will that continue? The high global appetite for US treasuries due to their safety, liquidity, because they don't have a default record, and relatively favorable yields helps the US finance its debt. So who holds the debt? What is debt? Debt is, this is revenue, this is the spending. The balance, somebody has to buy that debt, and for that the US government gives you interest also. These are all the treasury bills that people are owning, and this is where I'm showing with different countries who holds how much of this debt. For example, today foreign investors own over 30% of the debt. Japan is the largest one with close to over 1 trillion. China used to be around 750 or 800 billion. It has now reduced it. And apart from China and Japan and United Kingdom, no other single country holds more than 500 billion in US debt. I remember India holds around 289 billion or something like that. India also has some treasury bills. An increasing share of foreign holdings come from countries with large financial sectors such as Belgium, Ireland, Luxembourg, and the Cayman Islands. These are all financial tax havens. So now you know nobody is going to be touched, because if you touch them, then they will not buy the treasury bills. Then US will have to raise its interest rates. See, everywhere you try to move something here, something else will give there. So this is not an easy exercise for Trump. I'm very curious as to what he's going to do to change this situation around. What is the impact of rising US debt? The sheer volume of accumulating deficits alongside a long-running lack of political will to raise revenue or cut spending has renewed debate over the peril posed by the national debt. Some economists warn that high debt could limit US global leadership by reducing resources for military, diplomatic, and humanitarian efforts. Yeah, US went and changed the regime in Bangladesh. Now it is heading towards a civil war. Then there will be calls for help. And again, who's expected to pay that? The taxpayer of the United States. Did you ask us before you went into this and did this? No. Then why should we pay for this? Well, nobody's asking the question now. See, this is the irony here. Others argue that the excessive debt could slow economic growth or trigger a fiscal crisis if investors doubt the US can manage its finances. I have a feeling something is going to happen in Bangladesh, guys. Something that has not happened in the past. Let's wait and see, because this Donald Lu trip is very intriguing to me. What is the impact of rising US debt? Loss of investor confidence might force the government to raise interest rates. That's the only lever it has. But if you do that, then inflation will go up. People will start screaming. A severe fiscal crisis could prompt sudden spending cuts or tax increases, potentially hurting the economy. So now you see the US debt, how it has gone up and up and up and up, and how it is going to go towards 180% perhaps by 2050. This is the big scare. Today you are at 122% or something like that. And in fact, if you look at COVID-19 pandemic and beyond, it has gone down a little bit, a small downward curve, and then again it is starting to go back up. This is a self-induced problem, if you ask me. The Democrats did it to themselves, and now with all these scorched earth decisions that the Biden administration is taking, that is going to make it harder and harder for Trump to come in and set things right. Well, one way to punish the Democrats is to send them to the doghouse for another 2 terms. Let the Republicans have a free run for 12 years and see how good a job they do of it. Debt management strategies. Most debt, that is, this is how do you reduce debt? You have to have spending cuts and tax increases, both of which are now anathema. Somebody is going to find the pinch. I'll tell you another thing. For no reason, the insurance costs have shot up in California this year, 40 to 50%. Home insurance, car insurance, health insurance. What is the reason? Well, I'm told that many people have stopped buying home insurance, especially when they don't owe anything to the bank. In other words, if you've already paid down your EMI, you've paid down your interest, then you own the house fully. And then you look at it and say, why do I need to pay insurance? Because there are 2 types of insurance for home in US. You have the home insurance, then you have to separately take earthquake insurance. Home insurance doesn't cover earthquake insurance. So then you can ask me, what does home insurance cover? Well, if there is burglary in the house, if you have that covered, it will pay for it. If the house goes down, it burns down because of arson, or if your neighbor's house caught fire and the flames jumped over to your house and your house got fire, things like that. So people stopped buying these 2 insurance programs. So the insurance companies have to make money somewhere, so go and sock it to the people who have to have car insurance. You cannot drive a car on the streets in California without automobile insurance. So stick it to them there. The other one is health insurance. You have to have health insurance. How can you risk it? So that's the other one. I'm sure in 5 years' time you're going to have private clinics like a hole-in-the-wall hospitals where people will do basic stuff, basic surgery even, because people can just not afford to have health insurance premiums. It's just gone through the roof. So see, these are all the things that are happening now. And so companies are already facing revenue shortfalls, and all of them have huge administrative staff that can be reduced, but they won't do it without having some sort of a knife being held to their throat or a gun being held towards their temple. They're not going to break it down, because these are all like, how do I make money? How do I become bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger? So we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. Now, you cannot target entitlement programs like Social Security, Medicaid and Medicare, because these are all things that the people who are receiving it now had paid into it earlier. See, this is where the problem is. If the workforce starts shrinking, less money gets put into this pool. So if there's less money going into the pool, then in order to make up the shortfall, the government has to put in that money. So this is the other huge problem that the US government has, which means they need to keep the employment going at a very high level. Today, there are lots of people who are having 2 jobs, 3 jobs, and the government is double counting them as jobs, and that is wrong. If you work 2 20-hour jobs or 2 25-hour jobs for a 50-hour work week, you can't count it as 2. It has to be only 1 job. So the unemployment numbers, in my opinion, they are a fake. The unemployment is much more than what is being told there, and many companies are shunning away from giving full-time jobs, because full-time jobs means full-time commitments for many things, and they don't want to give those commitments because there's a hidden expenditure associated with these things. So give it out to consulting, and also it is easy to fire consultants. You can also fudge the consultant expenses so that the per employee revenue when Wall Street looks at your performance looks high. This is another pet peeve of mine, that this is wrong. In fact, companies like Google, many companies, why just single out Google? Many companies, 50 to 55% of their workforce is now consultants, and they work in the same campus as the full-time employees. They walk like a duck, quack like a duck, but they're not considered to be a duck. Go figure. The 2010 Simpson-Bowles bipartisan plan proposed reducing benefit levels, raising the retirement age, and cutting military spending, while also raising over $1 trillion in tax revenue. These are all nice small measures, but nothing big came out of it. Political obstacles such as anti-tax pledges by many Republicans in Congress limit the feasibility of raising revenue. Now, the other things that can be done, some believe the US can continue borrowing without major consequences due to strong investor trust, but many experts warn that time is running out. I mean, if you keep creating wars all over the world and there is no war in US, guess where the world is going to invest in, right? The Penn-Wharton budget model suggests that after 20 more years of deficits, even drastic measures might fail to prevent default. Economists and fiscal watchdogs caution that exploiting the US global economic privilege could erode trust and stability in the long run. So this was a economics deep dive. I hope you understood what I was trying to say, and I have been talking about this for 25-30 years, because ever since Reagan started running up deficits, this has been something that has been talked about, dinner conversations, water cooler conversations, and many of us are very concerned about what is happening. This is not the great country it used to be 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and 30 years ago. Every time they have a problem like this, they go and jump into another war. In my opinion, that itself is wrong. Let's wait and see how Trump solved this problem. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to click on the bell button for notifications. Namaskar.